The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We are on the last lap, or maybe the last two laps, of Science at the Doorstep to God by Father Robert Spitzer, S.J., Ph.D. And we finished chapter 5. We're on chapter 6. Are we free amidst our experience of God? And there'll be a conclusion and an appendix of some interest, I would say. But let us launch into this on chapter 6. Are we free? Does anyone have any opening remarks, questions, concerns, ideas?
Well, I've read through to the end at this point, and I'm champing at the bit to talk about some things, but I have nothing until page 205, so I'm going to be compliant and desist until we get to there.
All right. Well, 191 is the first section on the numinous, and that goes on for how long? 97 to page 200, perhaps, or 202. Do you have anything to say about the numinous?
Well, even introducing the numinous, which he lists along with a sense of, this is the top of 190, the numinous is on a list of the things that we sense, which are of the sacred, mysterious, spiritual, and numinous. And what he's saying here is that these interior experiences, as much as people would like to make them merely emotional, psychological states, he's saying that these cannot be reduced merely to physical or chemical processes, which is what emotions are triggered by different things. So the fact that he's even exploring this and use this as expression, interiorly present, that God is interiorly present. I think if more people believed that that were true, the more able they would be to respond to God. Because if you're just writing off your spiritual experience as something emotional, strictly subjective, there's no real there that you're responding to. These are just emotional states, psychological states. And some of them are. I'm not saying you don't need discernment. You need discernment. But if people believed that God could actually be interiorly present to them, imagine how freer they would be to respond to God. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. And my unease, I've had 3 mystical experiences that come to mind, and I always feel a bit bashful about talking about them. I'm not going to here. But, these are things that I would consider to be authentic mystical experiences rather than my getting a high from seeing the beauty of nature or what have you, which is the presence of God, but it's not mystical in this very numinous sense we're talking about here. But I'm always uncomfortable because I'm always uncomfortable when we talk about faith without reason or reason without faith. And as Ronald Knox said, mysticism begins in mist and ends in schism, which is one of my favorites. But of course, that's not always true. You have great Christian mystics. If the mysticism conforms with orthodoxy, then it's worth taking seriously as regards to authenticating it. Obviously, if it's heretical, then if it's mystical at all, it's not coming from God. So all of these things are even mysticism is somehow subject to reason, in the sense that if the mystical experience does not conform with our known understanding of truth in terms of orthodoxy, there's something not quite right about the mystical experience, right? So that's what I'm saying. I've always felt uncomfortable. I've had 3 that I can think of that I think are authentic, and I thank God for them, but I just feel uncomfortable talking about it. That's the problem.
Hans Urs von Balthasar probably wrote and knew as much about mysticism as anybody in the 20th century. As a young theologian, he actually was asked to do the commentary on the Summa Theologica, where Thomas Aquinas talked about charisms, of which mysticism is one. And then, of course, he was there for the conversion of Ivan von Speyer, who I believe was an authentic Christian mystic. He surely believes that. But one of the things that impressed me about the way he described Adrienne and other mystics was that there is no clear line between faith and mysticism. Faith is a kind of knowledge as well. It's not just a complete assertion of something we have no awareness of at all. But so there's a gradation, and mysticism is merely, let us say, a heightened experience of what we already possess by the gift of faith. And therefore, it's true that those who have extraordinary gifts will stand out. Nevertheless, does not divide them off from the ordinary Christian believer.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in talking of John of the Cross, St. John of the Cross, who was a mystic, and people often talk about the dark, the unknowing, and overcoming the senses and the intellect. John of the Cross himself insisted you cannot come to God except with Jesus Christ and his cross. And so no prayer, no exaltation, no ecstasy can ever take you beyond the experience of Jesus of Nazareth dying for us on the cross and rising. So again, maybe I want to relativize mysticism because, unlike you, Joseph, I'm not aware of having any mystical experiences, or even numinous ones for that matter. And to expand on that a bit, I don't know how everybody else lives because I'm not everybody else. It seems to me that people spend a lot of time working, taking care of duties, eating, watching television, being on social media, and so on. I do very little. I don't have a family. Prayer is part of the regimen we're supposed to have as priests and as religious, and it's something I do habitually, and I enjoy it. But I have a lot of time where I'm not doing anything, If we're not doing anything, then, every molecule, every breath of air, every ray of sunlight is a source of saying, oh, wow, that's a gift of God, But I'm wondering if people's lives don't have any openings like that,
Mm-hmm.
where they can actually stand back and not be doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Will they have a numinous experience? And for me, numinous simply means I believe in God. I believe God exists. He's a creator and redeemer and so on. And therefore, everything for me is numinous if I'm paying attention to it.
Yep. Well, that's okay. So this question of have you had a religious experience of the kind that he's talking about? You say you can count 3. You say you can count 0. But now this explication you just gave us about seeing not just the beauty of things, that's one thing. And that's also, like you say, an opening to God for sure, the experience of beauty. And he's going to talk about that later in here. And maybe I'm misunderstanding what a numinous experience is, but I think that if your encounter of something in nature, or it could be a raindrop, it could be a dewdrop on a leaf. And yes, you have this moment of quiet and you're looking at that. And yes, it's beautiful. But if that beauty actually brings about an illumination of the Creator, and not in an abstract way, not alone, but in a deeply personal way, that dewdrop is speaking to me.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. This is what Jared Manny Hopkins calls in stress, right? This is the eureka moment, the moment when the inscape, God's grandeur, God's presence in creation is perceived by us. This moment of grace, when we have that eureka moment, that moment of in stress. That's what that's what Father's talking about. And this is certainly our mystical engagement with reality. I mean, that's
Sure.
what they say. I think we're all sort of grappling or trying to grasp at what is the numinous, because all of this is numinous.
And
It's not a mystical experience in the way that Adrian von Speyer or St. John of the Cross had mystical experiences, but they are mystical experiences.
And I would go a little step further in that not only does it speak of the reality of creator because of design and harmony and all these things, which could it be arbitrarily, randomly just pop into existence. They all, if God creates with his word, then what he creates speaks. And so you and this dewdrop can actually be in a conversation, not that the dewdrop's talking to you and you're talking to it. Okay, maybe you're having another kind of experience that we would call a psychotic experience. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this realization of God's love, this realization of God's voice, this realization that God is speaking to me personally in this moment. And then along with this moment of this dewdrop, you might just a moment later come across in a book the word dewdrop, or someone starts talking and they talk about and now what you're experiencing in this set of moments, that they're all interconnected, that the dewdrop there is related to the one there, and that all these that you're experiencing in a deeply personal way in this moment, that this illuminates your mind, your heart, fills you with joy, assures you of God's love, assures you of God's presence in your life and in the world and in all lives and throughout the world. This to me is a religious experience. And I think that more people, if they had more quiet, as you were just saying, I think more people would experience this more often and actually have greater assurance that A, there's a God, B, that it's a personal God, which he also gets into here, and C, he cares about you and talks to you, and all you have to do is listen.
Yeah, and the very word mystery, as well as being a mystery in itself, I think is a further proof of God's existence and our being made in his image, because does a rabbit perceive the existence of something which is mysterious? No, it doesn't, right? It is confined by instinct. It fulfills its appetites as best as it can. It has no concept or no perception of the mysterious. So I think the very fact that mystery exists and is perceived by us is a further inkling and proof or argument for God's existence and the fact that we are made in his image.
That's right. And that's one of the arguments Father Spitzer uses, the fact that we have these kinds of experiences. And as far as we know, the animal kingdom does not, speaks to the reality of our soul, and that our soul's in communication with the even greater soul of God that created all the other ones, that this very thing is a link in our understanding of ourselves, Joseph, exactly. Because as he says over and over again in this chapter, these cannot be reducible to physical chemical processes as much as materialists keep trying to do. And of course, there's the famous line, right, in A Christmas Carol, when the ghost of Jacob Marley introduces himself to Scrooge, and Scrooge says, "You could just be a bit of undigested beef." Right? I mean, so this
it's
conflict,
a reduction of mystery to psychosis, basically.
and it's clear,
You're mad.
or indigestion. you
Right.
know. So
the physical causes of a malady called madness. Right.
Yes.
Well, I want to take the side of Scrooge. Personally, I want to take it because, first of all, mystery. The word muein in Greek actually is an interesting etymological root here. It actually means, in its most fundamental sense, to open the mouth and shut the eyes. It's awe. It's ineffable. We can't speak. I've had that, the beauty of a sunset, a dewdrop, whatever you might say. But to me, it only becomes numinous or transcendent if I look at it and say, to me, the path is, I'm not saying for everybody or for me, maybe in anybody else, but for me, it's this exists. This is beautiful. This is more than I am. This is something I couldn't have done myself. This is beyond. There must be an author to this. So to me, what makes it numinous is intellectual conviction that
But
this
but
cannot be
But-
something that
but
stands on its
Father,
own.
on many occasions, uh, on numerous occasions, we have witnessed us. I know I can speak for Vivian here. Numerous occasions we've witnessed your presence of the numinous because you break down in tears. You know, I mean, if it's purely an intellectual affirmation, then your response, that I would suggest that you are responding to it as a mystical experience, not merely an intellectual affirmation.
No, but that's because I've antecedently seen that there must be someone behind this, a storyteller, a maker, and so on. And now it's taken on a new meaning for me. Otherwise, it's just a waterfall, and I have the feeling, wow, hear that thunderous waterfall. But I honestly think that if it weren't for the intellectual component, at least for me, that it would just be a feeling. And
Oh no, I agree. That's why I was trying to insist, Father, that just as faith and reason have to be interdissolubly wedded, so does mysticism and orthodoxy. So mysticism and reason. That if the mystical experience I've had, all ultimately they transcend my faculties, right? That's why I'm calling them mystical, but they don't contradict my understanding of reality. The mystical experiences lead me closer to the divine reality, which is Jesus Christ. So these things aren't divorced, and I think your response to them indicates that you're having a mystical experience. But maybe it's a question of how we
I
use
knew
it.
it. I'm a mystic without knowing it.
That's what I would say. But here, let me. I think what happens is sometimes we forget that the intellect is a power of the soul, and now we can reduce things to the intellect as if the intellect were some separate thing from all these other faculties of the soul that are all working together to put us in communication with God. And God is trying to communicate with us, okay? So if you look on page 192, where Spitzer defines Newman in the middle of the first full paragraph, the Newman is experienced as an interior presence of a transcendent holy other, which is mysterious, overwhelming, fascinating, and awe-inspiring. And now this is the next step, as well as desirable, inviting, and enchanting. And I would go so far as to say, and loving, and the response that's being elicited from you is to love in return. The fact that that dewdrop or that waterfall or that rainbow or that sunset or that baby you're holding in your arms or any number of these experiences that we have, if it leads at the end of this trail to I'm being loved, I want to love in return, you, my friends, have entered on the numinous path to an encounter with the loving God, and that is a religious experience. And yes, the intellect was involved in deducing there must be a creator and all this, but what it leads to is love, and he talks about this later, that whatever the bunny rabbit is doing hopping around, looking at the same dewdrops I am, it's not going to lead the bunny rabbit to an ecstatic experience of the love of God. Okay. But it can lead me to that.
But I want to put the emphasis on the word lead. That is to say that, yes, it's through the senses that I already intellectually I perceive the world around me. And that is, it moves me, but there's a process there of recognizing it can't be on its own. It's because you hear the voice, all right, you hear the sounds, okay, and it's intelligible sounds, but all of a sudden you say, oh, and that's already something amazing, a sound, a harmony, whatever. But then you say, well, wait a minute, there must be a speaker if there's a voice, right? So it's only that realization that there's someone behind this.
That's right.
That makes it numinous. Otherwise, it's just an experience of sound.
Right. Well, that's what I just read.
Yeah.
The experience The transcendent holy other. The holy other is the one behind all these things.
Well, but it doesn't start that way, though.
No, I didn't say it did. I said it's. I'm saying there's a process whereby, yes, your sense experience, your intellect, and all these things are all in play. But if what it leads you to is an encounter with the loving God, and you now feel you want to respond in turn, you want to love back. All right, this is a numinous experience. And I would say that everybody on the planet with a soul has these experiences.
They all have the experiences, but they don't all recognize there's someone who is behind them.
And I'm saying if they understood that this presence within themselves could actually be God, that they would understand that more often. I think we've been so beaten down by materialism, more than we even realize. The reduction of everything to chemicals and physical processes and physical laws and all these things. We're stunted in our ability to have these experiences.
Which is why, begging to differ somewhat, that I do believe that beaten down by materialism and succumbing through pride to narcissism, there's a significant portion of the population that have golemized themselves to such a degree that they become deaf, dumb, and blind to the sensual experiences that leave them open to mysticism. They basically have divorced themselves from, excommunicated themselves from this mystical presence. And that's a tragedy, and that requires prayer and healing. But I don't think everybody is open to it because they've become closed to it.
And it's not all, when you say Golemized, I mean, I hesitate using such strong language because we all know that Gollum became what he became because he was a murderer. But for a lot, Joseph Ratzinger would talk about this, that the fact that we live, for example, for the most part, modern people, in artificially constructed environments, man-made constructed environments, climate-controlled rooms, windows that don't even open, heat comes from the furnace, and all of these things that we've created for our comfort and convenience have helped to cut us off with any kind of contact from the seething, living world of which we're a part, and with which we have these experiences that actually put us in communion with God. And he says that to overcome all that, not to mention that the architecture in our own minds, which has been built by modern mathematics and modern physics and all these things. I mean, modern man is a stunted being as a result of all of this, and his own spiritual capacity to be open to God. The growth of that has been stunted, and it's not entirely his fault.
We're living in virtual reality and we're living in artificial reality, and we think it's progress. I mean, that's obviously tragedy. I would just say one thing, and I'm trying not to be argumentative here. As regards the word Golemized being too strong, we are all murderers. We did all shout, "Crucify him." It's what we do with the fact that we're murderers that makes the difference.
Yes, I'm only saying that, like, part of the New Age phenomenon. We don't even call it that anymore, do we? Is that passé to call it that? Yeah. But in any case, this, you would hear from the non-Christian, neo-pagan, groups or peoples or whatever, this re-enchantment of the world, this get out into nature thing. Well, they're touching on something very important. We do need
insofar as someone's a neo-pagan is going out and doing the 14,000 peaks in Colorado, they're not Golemized, right? I mean, no, I'm not saying that someone's Golemized because of their beliefs. I'm saying we can become so narcissistically bound up in the virtual reality you're talking about that we no longer even experience or are open to the experience of real reality, such as the 14,000 foot peaks in the Rockies.
I'm agreeing with you. There's a guy who's written in First Things recently. He's worth looking up. And why can't I think maybe Thomas here will remember his.
Paul Kingsnorth.
Paul Kingsnorth? Kingsnorth. Anyway, grew up in England, Anglican boys' schools, blah, blah. And he's gone on this entire spiritual journey, atheism, then kind of this neo-pagan, TM, this and that. Finally, through just numinous experiences along the way. And yet ultimately, these numinous experiences lead him to Christ. Now he's a member of the Romanian Orthodox Church, I think, and he lives in Ireland on a farm. But the point is that his whole journey.
I would suggest that his journey is continuing.
Yes, I know you would, and we'll wink along with you. But the point is that his journey, if you want to find it in First Things, it's also been republished elsewhere. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right? That to reopen the modern person to the numinous experience that they could be having, that would lead them ultimately to God and maybe even to Jesus as well. That this is what Spitzer is trying to give us. What Spitzer's doing with this book is trying to say, hey, don't let science stop you from doing this, because guess what? The scientific knowledge that we have and so on actually supports that this is possibly true.
Yeah, I'm scribbling down some notes here for the discussion questions, because we haven't engaged the text very much, but we've had a half-hour conversation, very interesting, and a discussion, going off from the topic of the numinous.
All right. Well, then I will amend what I said. I don't recall having any numinous experiences, but almost all of them are numinous.
There you go. And that's the man I know, folks. That's the Father Fessio I know. The numinous man.
But he's talking about it as if the numinous experience is kind of, if so many people have it, there must be a God. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I still think that it's through this experience that I come to realize there must be a God, and therefore the experience means more to me now, even than when I first had it. But the fact that everybody feels a certain way is, to me, a thin reed to place an argument on. On the other hand, he's saying none of these arguments perhaps are conclusive, but they're all pointing the same direction. When you put them all together, it's overwhelming.
Right.
And I do think, just going back to what we said, the very fact that we can perceive something which we call mysterious transcends pure physical explanation.
Right. And then when he goes on 197 and brings together C.S. Lewis and these other fellows, Otto and Eliade, I'd never heard of them before.
Eliade?
Yeah.
Oh, he's very famous. Mercier Eliade. Okay. Otto was also famous.
In any case.
Before your time.
Yes.
Way before your time.
Maybe I need to look them up. Anyway, so in addition to this, shall we say, somewhat universal human experience of the numinous, we also get the somewhat universal experience of man being a religious creature, that not only is he prone to these experiences, but now in response to these experiences comes a worship impetus, and then that takes shape in religion. And so when they point out, Lewis and these other guys, the universality of the world religious experience, the kinds of fundamentals that end up being expressed over and over and over again, is kind of an argument in itself for something special about man as a creature, and that points to, or at least it asks the question, why would this be so? Why would he be like this? Why would they all come up with, for example, first of all, the existence of the transcendent, and then along with that, a law of general beneficence, the law of the duties to parents, elders, ancestors, duties to children, justice, good faith, truth-telling, mercy, magnanimity, the fact that these become sort of...
Where are you reading from?
On the footnotes of page 197.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Where he spells out in the footnotes these kind of common characteristics of the religious experience of mankind, right? And I was reading not too long ago from the actual reductions of the Jesuit missionaries to the New World and their encounter with the native peoples here. And even though there were a lot about these societies that were cruel and primitive and all these things, the Jesuits were so impressed by, this is where the noble savage came from. It did not come from Rousseau. It came from well, he might have then articulated later in his own warped social contract stuff. But in any case, those Jesuit missionaries coming into contact with these Indian tribes and seeing the level of heroic sacrifice, the level of bravery, the level of magnanimity, the level of, and for them to realize, well, I'll be doggone, they're men just like us. They have souls just like we do, even though it's been expressed culturally differently or whatever. That this was now a meeting point of these two cultures to see certain things in common, which doesn't mean that there weren't now a war of cultures that took place in the conflicts between the European powers and the native peoples. But nevertheless, the Jesuit missionaries are recording this in their diaries. And they even go on to say, one of the reasons why I left France was because I was sick of the white stockings and the pink shoes and the foppish wigs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, thank God I got out of there.
That was the men.
Yes. And that was the men. And they're saying, that is exactly right. And this one Jesuit missionary is saying, that was the men I left behind. These guys that I'm hanging out with and smoking the peace pipe with around the fire, these guys are real men. That's basically what they were saying. But it was because of the magnanimity of soul that they saw, even though expressed in many different cultural ways. I'm just saying the universality of this is a kind of mind-blowing experience.
I want to make a closing remark to a small one, is magnanimity. You're kind of putting the M's and N's in different positions.
Oh, sorry about that.
Magnanimity, but
thank you.
You mentioned earlier about God creates through His Word, therefore He's speaking to us, and we're meant to respond. And I want to repeat something I'm sure I've said before, this beautiful song of the Men in the Furnace, which we sing every other Sunday, of Daniel, rivers and seas praise the Lord, all creatures praise the Lord. Well, they are God speaking to us, but they can't respond other than by being themselves, but that we are called to respond to God for all His creation in thanks, but we give voice to all that is under us, the seas, the rivers, the sun, the stars, the animals, and the creatures, all that sort of stuff. It's a beautiful circular, return going out from God, God's word speaking to us. We respond, and we're able to take up into our response not just our own selves and our own experiences, but the whole cosmos with us and bring it back to God.
Amen.
That's it. We'll be back next week. God bless you all.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.